So the purpose of this video is to kind of go over lesson planning. Now, I've actually done numerous videos on this as well as far as lesson planning. In fact, my latest video I think was like how to lesson plan in under 5 minutes. But what I want to talk about is how to actually implement a lesson in your classroom. And that's what I want to talk about. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I actually had a conversation with somebody I worked with, or somebody I am working with regarding teaching and everything else. And he brought up a question. We're trying to figure out how to implement his lessons. And one of the things he brought up was this idea of chunking. He says that he's been search things and everything else, and the word chunking comes up when it comes to regarding the information. And so that made me start to think, how does that actually look in the classroom, the chunking? And what that term means is, for example, let's say we're doing notes on something, and I could just spend the entire class period having students copy notes, right? Here's a note, copy this, have another copy this. Or let's say it's a worksheet. I could just have the entire period, I have 50 minutes in class, I could just have students work on the entire worksheet for 50 minutes. But that is the problem with that, more often than not, is students lose attention. I mean, think about it. If you had to do one task for 50 minutes straight, unless you really love that task, you're probably going to lose interest in that task. And so with that said, if we implement something called chunking, or delivering the information in small little bite-sized pieces, it makes it easier for the students. It breaks up the class as well. And so I was trying to think, how does that actually look in my classroom? Because the misconception could be this, that every, however long you want to do it, 10 minutes, 15, 20, every 10, 15, 20 minutes, you have to move on to something different, a different subject, a different concept, a different idea, something like that. And when this teacher and I were talking, that was kind of the idea that they had. I said, okay, well, if I want to spend 5 minutes on an activity or 10 minutes on an activity regarding information, does that mean that the next 10 minutes after that, I have to give them something new? And then the next minute after that, something new? And the answer is no. You can stay with the same subject, stay with the same concept for the entire period. In fact, for me, I usually spend about 2 days on a particular concept. I'll give you an example, a real life example going on today. Today I had a lesson and we're studying the Bill of Rights. And my lesson is students will basically read a real search warrant, and as they're reading the real search warrant, they're going to make predictions on what happened with that crime. So it's a real crime that happened. They're going to read a real search warrant, and based upon that real search warrant, they're going to make prediction of what happened. Now, this is a 2-day activity. 2-day activity. The overall document itself is 10 pages. So 10 pages, 2-day activity. What I could have done is said, all right, students, this is a 2-day activity. Here are all the questions that I have for you regarding this. I think there's like maybe 20 questions. And then here's the 10-page document. I want you to read this document and answer all 10 or all 20 of these questions. And that takes about 2 days by the time they read it and everything else. I could have just gave them the work like that and said, go, there you go, 2 days, spend on it. But the problem with that is if you give too many things to students at one time, you're going to find that they only are able to focus for a shorter period of time, and you're going to lose a lot of the students. Because if they, first of all, 10 pages, they're like, I'm out. You already lose some just by that. And then when some are reading it, maybe 5-10 minutes into it, they're going to lose attention. And next thing you know, they start dropping like flies. And so a better way of implementing that lesson, same exact lesson, but a better way of implementing that lesson would be to chunk it. And that's exactly what I did. Let me get my light real fast. Give me 1 second. In my classroom, they're set up on automatic lights. So I actually chunked the information. And so I took the 10-page document and I separated it into 4 different parts. Let me see if I have it here. Here we go. And so I have part 1. So here's part 1 right here. And so this is the actual search warrant itself, right? And then there's attachment A and attachment B. And so I gave this to the students. I said, you got 15 minutes. There are 5 questions I want you to complete. And so they had to write down the 5 questions. And I said, all right, now that you wrote down the 5 questions, I want you to answer those 5 questions. And you have a total of 15 minutes to do that. And then I had a timer going to keep track of everything as well. So now they got a timer going. They're keeping track of everything. and they're writing the questions and answering the questions. And it takes about 15 minutes to do that. The important part is this. I gave it to them 15-minute chunk. And actually, even before this, even before I handed this to them, we had a warm-up activity, which was for them to copy down the Fourth Amendment. So they came into class. I gave them about 6 minutes to set up their paper and copy down the Fourth Amendment. That was 6 minutes. Then I gave them that's one chunk. And then I gave them a quick little introduction of what we're doing, you know, the assignment, the Fourth Amendment, Bill of Rights, what all that means. That took about 5 minutes. That was another chunk. So I got 6 minutes and then 5 minutes. And now we're on to the activity. And I said, you got 15 minutes. So the chunking looks like this so far. We got about 6 minutes of the warm-up. Then we got about 5 minutes of me explaining things. And then we got 15 minutes of their actually working on the activity. And so they started working on the activity, 15 minutes. Time went off. Timer's up. Okay. Next thing we do is we move on to the next chunk. And that's where we start sharing out our answers. That's where we start. That's when I start going over those questions. And so from there, and it took me about 5 minutes or so, I said, okay, we got 5 questions. Let's go through these. And as we're answering the questions, I'm explaining things. So for example, I said, okay, who's asking for the search warrant? And the answer would be the officer. Then the next question is, who has to give permission for it? And the answer would be the judge, or who has to sign off on it. And then I take that as an opportunity to explain checks and balances, judicial branch, and everything else, which is going back, going back to what we learned already. So it's reinforcing what we learned, checks and balances. And so that was the next part of it. All right, and so we have the discussion about that. And then we talk about what they're looking for. And I explain how they, you can't just go into a house, grab whatever you want. There's certain things. And so I explain it. As we're answering the questions, I'm explaining. So that takes maybe another 5-10 minutes. And that was one chunk. And that pretty much took care of day 1. Then we go on to day 2. Now, day 2, same thing. I'm chunking the information, chunking it. They come in, and on their desk is going to be the second part of it. And I think I give them about maybe about 20 minutes for this or so. There are questions that go along with it. So they're going to come in, they're going to write down the questions, and then from there, they're going to answer the questions. And then from there, 20 minutes are done. We pause, we discuss. Maybe about 5 minutes or so, we discuss it. All right. And then the next part of it is this, then they go into part 3. All right. And I give them about 5 minutes on this one. This is actually what they found in the search. And that's probably part 3. That's about 5 minutes. Pause. Quick discussion. And then we go to actually what happened, the story about what happened in the actual crime itself. And so as we go through this, it's a whole entire process to it. So anytime you have a lesson, think about how you could break up the smaller parts. And by doing that, you hold kids more accountable. By doing that, you have a better flow to it as well, and you don't lose as many students. And so regarding this assignment, the other key is this. It's how I give them the information. I don't want to give them all the questions at first, because what will happen is, and all the document, because some kids are going to go through it really fast, and they're going to be waiting maybe a whole day. And there'll be other students that if you give it all to them, they're just going to zone out. So by chunking it up, it's a better way to pace it, to keep everybody on track, everybody on pace. And the other little key things that make this smoother as possible, as smooth as can be, is that timer. I always have a timer going. That timer is a visual thing. Of course, when it goes off, it's actually a audio thing as well. But they can actually see how much time they left. So there puts a little more of I'm not sure the right word is pressure on them, but it kind of shows them that they can't just waste so much time, that there is a deadline and they got to get to work and they can't be messing around. And so that timer is another thing. And then the other thing that helps the whole entire process is the transitions. And so what happens, since I have 4 different pieces of paper, while they're working on one paper, what I'll do is I'll maybe walk around, help students out, but then I'm also passing out the next document to them. Now, they can't move on to the next document because they don't have the questions to go along with it, but I already have the next document for them. So that way, when we're done discussing, let's say, document number 2, we're done discussing document number 2, and we go through our discussion about everything else, they already have on their desk document number 3, and then all I do is put up the questions, and they move right on to that. If I had to wait, all right, guys, done with document 2, let me pass out document 3, that little pause in it, that little extra minute or 2, that transition where students have nothing to do could lead to, not saying it's going to, but could lead to behavior problems. That little 2 minutes transition where you don't have something for them to work on, a lot of times will explode into 10 minutes of wasted time. There's so much time in class that gets lost in these transitions. And so you want to make it seamless as possible. And so when it comes to chunking, actually implementing a lesson plan, I thought about this a lot. And when I explain this, how I explain it is you want to think through every minute of your class period. If your lesson is, let's say, notes, right? How are you going to break up those notes? If you're going to spend 1 day notes, how are you going to break that up? I want you to think about from the moment that they walk into the class to the moment they leave the class. And then on top of that, I want you to weave in breaks on class, we'll call it. Breaks are chunks in there where you can transition from one thing to the other. It can still be notes, there's different things regarding the notes. So for example, on a normal day in my class when we do notes, we'll say it's a 1 day notes. Here's the chunking that goes on. Kids will come in and they'll do a warm-up activity. Takes about maybe 6 to 8 minutes. That's the warm-up activity. That's the first chunk. Might be like definitions. And it's also getting your paper set up. Then the next chunk comes me explaining what we're going to be doing that day. All right. So these are notes about the Bill of Rights, Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Someone tell me what is an amendment to the Constitution, and then they'll raise their hand. So that might take about 5 minutes explaining what we're going to. We're going to do notes today, and then at the end of notes, we're going to do a summary. So first part is warm up, then me explaining what we're doing. Then the next part is maybe we start the notes. And so maybe I give them a slide or two to copy. And while they're copying, I'm explaining. That takes maybe 5 minutes. But then here's the nice thing about it is I chunk that up. So maybe after the first 2 slides, I have a third slide that I call like my big thinking question, which is a question that students will respond to. So let's talk about the Bill of Rights. And let's say first one, slide talks about what the Bill of Rights are, second one, what amendment is. And then the third question I might ask them is it ever okay to limit our rights? Or when should we limit our rights? And so it's a real broad question. But what that does is it chunks up the information. Instead of just being another slide and another slide, another slide they get a copy, now there's a slide there where they actually have to write a response, think about it, and that elicits a conversation. And so here we go, chunking, back it up. Let's all from the beginning. We got our warm-ups. That takes a little bit of time. Me explaining things takes a little bit of time. Maybe 2 slides of the notes takes a little bit of time. And then the discussion takes a little bit of time. And then maybe I go back to add a few more notes into it. So we have a few more notes. And then maybe I have a short little 5-minute video. And then maybe some more notes. And then finish off with a summary. These are all part of the notes. These are all information I want students to have. But I break it up in little increments. Now, to be 100% clear, I don't want you to think my class is perfect by any means. I have students that are still zoning off. I have students that still put their head down. I still have students that will do nothing. I mean, that's just unfortunately part of the game, right? That's unfortunately part of teaching, is you're going to have students like that. But what I found from my 20 years of experience is this, that if you're able to break up the information that way, you're going to have more interaction, more engagement than you would otherwise. It helps pace things, help keep students' attention better, and actually makes it easier on you as well, because if there's little chunks in there where you can take a breather instead of you talking for a total of 50 minutes, but you can take a breather as they're coming in doing the warm-up, as they're watching a short little video, or as they're writing their response, you're going to find yourself better able to pace yourself and keep yourself going for the entire class period, and then for all how many periods you have, 5 periods, as well. So when it comes to lesson planning, you got your overall lesson plan, and like I said, I got numerous videos on that. In fact, I think I'll put a link on this one here somewhere at the very bottom once this uploads. I have like a 2.5-hour video on how I lesson plan. I mean, it breaks it down to the T, right? But once you have that video going on, once you actually have your lesson plan going on, you got to think about how each day is going to play out. And as you're designing each day of your lesson, think to yourself, how can I chunk the information? How can I distribute the information? How can I break up this activity into smaller things? And let me give you one more example that some teachers have and how you might want to break it up is a worksheet, right? So if I have a worksheet that has 20 questions on the worksheet, I could just give the worksheet to them and tell them to answer answer the entire worksheet by the end of class. The problem with that, some students are going to finish early, and that might cause problems. Some students will see the whole entire worksheet and they might zone out, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do this. So what you may want to do is maybe you want to break up that worksheet into 2 parts or 3 parts. And then as part of that is maybe you actually have a discussion about the worksheets as well. Now, for me, I don't like necessarily giving students the answer to the worksheets, because I have found if I give students the answers to the worksheets, sometimes they'll sit there doing nothing, the real smart ones, will sit there, do nothing, and wait till the very end when I give the answers, and then they'll fill in the answers. And so I don't do that as well. And so if I have a worksheet, 20 questions, maybe I'll break it up 10 questions and 10 questions. So they come in, I tell them what we're going to be doing. That's our first chunk. And then I give them the worksheet. Then that's a second chunk. And then we take a pause from that. And then we have a discussion about that. That might be the third part, right? Discussion about that. And once again, I am kind of discussing the overall topic, not necessarily the answers. Then we do the second part of the worksheet, give some time for that, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then we have a discussion about that part. And then maybe at the very end, I have some sort of reflection for them to complete or do. But once again, same idea. You have a worksheet. That's the overall activity. But instead of just giving it to them, having them work on it, break it up as much as you can, but also to keep the flow and the attention of students going on. So with all that said, the bell's about to ring here for the next class. I'm going to wrap this up. As always, if you ever need anything at all, feel free to reach out. I mean, I have tons of videos. I do coaching, you name it. I'm here to help. Or if you just have a questions, feel free to email me. I'd be more than happy to answer any kind of questions that I can. With that said, have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all soon.